This discussion is going to be on Chapter 24, Nutrition, Objective 2. Now, I'm actually going to split this into several shorter videos because this video could get kind of long otherwise. So I'm going to break it down into 4 separate videos. So this first video, we're going to take a look at carbohydrates. Objective 2 is discussing, to back up a minute, is discussing all of the nutrients, their dietary sources, daily recommended amounts of each. So I'm going to break it down into the 3 energy yielding nutrients. So there'll be a video for each one of the 3 energy yielding nutrients, and then the last video will be just the rest of the objective, the 3 remaining nutrients that are not directly energy yielding. So first, to take a look at carbohydrates. If y'all remember, carbohydrates building block is glucose. So this is the structure of a glucose molecule. That's why when you see pictures of carbohydrates or glucose, you'll see this 6-sided figure here. So with carbohydrates, it is a macronutrient. You need to know the definition of that. Macronutrient means it's required in large amounts. It is organic, meaning it contains carbon. An inorganic molecule is one that does not contain carbon. It is energy yielding. So of the 6 nutrients, this one directly produces ATP, or energy. Now, as far as what you need to know, how much the body needs, a person is going to need, of their daily intake, 45 to 65% should be in the form of carbohydrates. I know that seems kind of high because we always think of carbohydrates as being bad for you, but good carbohydrates, you're going to need 45 to 65% of your diet from carbohydrates. So for example, if you were on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, then 900 to 1,300 kilocalories should be in the form of carbohydrates. So about 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. You do need to memorize this. Carbohydrates provide, for every 1 gram of carbohydrate, they provide 4 kilocalories of energy. So you're going to need to know that conversion when we get to the end of this chapter, because there's going to be some problems that we do where we are going to have to calculate the kilocalories using from a food label. Okay, so you're going to need to know that. So for example, I'm just giving you generic information here. So we're looking at a Subway sandwich. I just eeny, meeny, miny, mo, pick something here. So we're looking at a Subway sandwich. We'll use blue. Now we're looking at the carbohydrate section right here. So that's what we're looking at, and we're looking at the meatball marinara sandwich. We could look at a bunch of other stuff, but I just picked this one. So if you eat a meatball marinara sandwich, you're going to consume 49 grams of carbohydrates. So for this person who eats the meatball marinara sandwich from Subway, they have consumed 196 calories in the form of carbohydrates. Now, where did we get that 196 from? Well, if you go back to, for every gram, you're going to produce 4 kilocalories of energy. So you're going to multiply the grams that are given in the food label by the number of kilocalories per gram for carbohydrates. So that's 49 times 4. So that's where your 196 kilocalories come from. So that's where that comes from. Now, over here where you see total energy in kilocalories, keep in mind this is coming from all 3 of your energy yielding nutrients. That number right there, 435, is coming from all of the energy from the protein, all of the energy from the carbohydrate, and all of the energy from the fats, because those are your 3 energy yielding nutrients. So 196 is from that 435, 196 of that is from carbohydrates. So yes, you're going to have to do some math on your test. You will be provided a calculator when you do your Respondus test. It will be available within that browser, so you won't have to do anything. Now, if you take yours in the testing center, you can ask to borrow one of their calculators, or you can take your own, but keep in mind, if you do take your own calculator, they will be clearing it before and after you get to the test. So with carbohydrates, hopefully you guys remember this, you've got monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are made up of single sugars. Disaccharides are two sugars joined together, sucrose, maltose, and lactose. And then polysaccharides, you've got starch and cellulose. So this right here, just a straight chain starch. And if you remember originally when I told you, oh, glucose molecules, sugar molecules, they're represented by this six-sided figure. That's what that is. And up here, you just got an example of foods that are monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. So the use of carbohydrates in the body. So let's take a look at these monosaccharides: glucose, fructose, and galactose. Notice they do all end in ose. That's a big key to let you know that we're dealing with sugars here. So polysaccharides and disaccharides, through the process of digestion, which we talked about in the previous chapter, are broken down into single sugars, monosaccharides. So when you eat that hamburger, that your body is going to break it down into these three monosaccharides, if those are available in the food that you just consumed. So monosaccharides can be absorbed into the circulatory system. Fructose and galactose, they all go to the liver, right? That's one of the things carbohydrates do. They all go to the liver. But glucose is what the liver wants. So if you have monosaccharides such as fructose and galactose, the liver is going to convert them into glucose. That's the preferred method. So glucose, whether made in the liver or digested, so it doesn't matter where the source of the glucose was, it's still going to be able to be made into ATP. Once it gets converted into glucose, if you had fructose and galactose and the liver ended up making it into glucose, it doesn't really matter. It's all glucose when it's all said and done, and the body's going to use it. It doesn't matter where it came from, how it got there, how it became glucose. It's glucose now, and the body's going to use it to make energy. So too much glucose, if you overeat carbohydrates for the day, the excess carbohydrate, the excess glucose is going to be stored in the form of glycogen. Now I want you to notice again, we've talked about this back in AP1, but I want you to notice again where this glycogen is able to be stored. It's able to be stored in the liver and in your muscle cells, specifically skeletal muscle cells is what we're talking about here. So I'm just going to point out something because we're going to talk about it a little bit later. For instance, the brain cannot store glycogen, but has to have an energy supply. Your heart cannot store glycogen, but it also has to have an energy supply. So just something to kind of think about as we move through. So glycogen storage is limited. Glycogen is a bulky molecule, takes up a lot of space, and it's very limited. So any extra glucose that is present, once these glycogen storage facilities are full, and they've reached their maximum capability, everything else is going to get converted to fats, also known as lipids, and they're going to be stored in adipose tissue. Now, while you have limited glycogen storage facilities, you have unlimited adipose tissue, so you have unlimited lipid storage or fat storage. You can store as much fat as you want. I know, not really the thing we want to hear, right? So you have actually, I think you've got this picture in your packet there. So you've got your polysaccharide, which is multiple sugars joined together by bonds. Through the process of digestion, it will then break that polysaccharide down into two sugars and single sugars, such as monosaccharides, glucose, and fructose. These are in the lumen of the small intestine, for example, and that's where we're at right now. So this is the small intestine. Those will then pass through that epithelial lining and go into the capillary. Remember, carbohydrates go into the bloodstream and then they head off to the liver. Now, fructose, when it gets to the liver, will be converted to glucose. Glucose is just going to be as glucose. Now, if your sugar levels are fine, if they're running a little maybe on the high side, by the time this glucose and fructose get to the liver will store it, right? Instead of putting it back into the blood supply because the sugar's already too high to begin with. So the liver will be able to convert that glucose into glycogen if your blood sugar is too high already and store it for later. Okay? If not, it'll just go ahead and let it, run on through. So here again, this is the handout that you've got. This is your carbohydrates coming in. This is your GI tract. So as they come through that small intestine, let's say, your monosaccharides, such as glucose, fructose, and galactose, they're going to pass from the GI tract into the circulatory system. So this is a blood vessel right here. They're going to pass through the blood vessel, and that blood vessel is going to take them by way of the hepatic portal vein to the liver. So you've got glucose. It's going to get stored in the form of glycogen based on the needs of the body at the time. If you have too much glucose, the excess will get stored in adipose tissue in the form of triglyceride. Now, fat can also be, when the body needs it, can be broken down. That glycerol from the fat, remember triglycerides are 3 fatty acid chains in a glycerol molecule. Well, the glycerol molecule from that fat, when the body is running low on energy, that can be converted in the liver through a process known as gluconeogenesis and get it back to glucose again. So you can take fat, part of it, and turn it back to sugar when the body's low on sugar. Amino acids, believe it or not, which are the breakdown of proteins, they can also, through a process known as gluconeogenesis, form glucose. And lactate. Lactate is a product of cellular respiration when you don't have enough oxygen supply. One of the byproducts is lactic acid, which causes that muscle to burn. So if you've got some lactate, that'll go back to the liver, get converted back into glucose through a process known as gluconeogenesis, and hopefully we can try to run that cellular respiration again if there's enough oxygen present. Now, the glycogen storage facilities, they can get converted back to glucose through a process known as glycogenolysis. So make sure you know these two terms, glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. I know those are some big words there. Now, glucose can also continue on and end up getting to the tissues, which are then going to take that and make ATP out of it. So depending on the sugar levels of the blood, if the liver needs to get it into glycogen storage facilities because the sugar levels are too high, it'll do that. If the sugar levels are not too high, that glucose in the blood will continue on to the tissues, and the tissues will then be able to make ATP out of that. So a pretty good little handout here, so make sure you understand your handout. So here are the definitions. So we talked about them on this page. Let's go ahead and officially write them down here. So gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis is the production of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, lactate, glycerol, amino acids. Let's back up. So we have got glycerol, amino acids, lactate. They are undergoing gluconeogenesis to produce glucose. Now, glycogenolysis. Let me change colors here a little bit. Glycogenolysis. Just kind of break that word down a little bit. Lysis means to break down. And what we're doing is we're breaking down glycogen into glucose. So let's back up. When we take glycogen and break it into glucose, we are looking at glycogenolysis. Glucogenesis. Glucogenesis. This is the formation of glycogen. So back up right here. Glucose into glycogen. This little arrow right here is representing glucogenesis. So that's what that arrow is right there representing, glucogenesis. It is taking glucose and putting it into glycogen. Ketogenesis. This is the conversion of fatty acids to ketone bodies. We do not have that represented on this slide. So we're going to talk about ketogenesis a little bit further down the line here, but know the definition. It is the conversion of fatty acids to ketone bodies. What are the steps of glucose homeostasis? Okay, first, you've got carbohydrates, and that could be polysaccharides, disaccharides. They're going to get broken down by enzymes, which we talked about in the previous chapter, into single sugars, monosaccharides. Those single sugars are glucose, fructose, and galactose. So monosaccharides, single sugars, that's what they are: glucose, fructose, and galactose. Now, these monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, and galactose, enter into the circulatory system. They A, go to the liver where they get stored as glycogen, or B, they can get converted to triglycerides and stored in adipocytes if the glycogen stores were already full, or C, they can remain in the circulatory system, enter body cells, and used to make ATP. That I'm describing what's happening here in this picture, okay? Now, what if blood glucose is low? What if you don't have enough glucose? Triglycerides can get converted back to glucose through a process known as gluconeogenesis in the liver, where the glucose can enter the bloodstream. So, if sugar levels are low in the blood, these molecules here can convert back to glucose through a process known as gluconeogenesis. So that's what this one was talking about here. Or number two, the glycogen in the liver can get converted back into glucose through a process known as glycogenolysis, where glucose can then re-enter the bloodstream. So this is making glucose from various molecules when blood sugar is too low. And this again was also represented on that previous picture. Now, fuel storage. This right here is a glycogen molecule. I told y'all that glycogen molecule, it's limited storage, but my goodness, is it huge. And you can see each one of these little bitty things right here is a glucose molecule, okay? So as far as fuel storage that the body has, you can store a couple of different things here. So glycogen can be stored, we said, in the liver and muscle cells. If you look, muscle cells store more glycogen than the liver does, okay? And it gives you an idea about how much. Now, as far as actual quantity goes, I'm not going to ask you for the number, but if I ask you what stores more, liver or muscle cells, you should be able to tell me, your skeletal muscle cells are going to store more glycogen. They can store more glycogen than the liver can. The next video, we're going to talk about lipids.